What would slot limits on the Coosa River system in Alabama mean for tournament fishing? That's what we're going to talk about right now. A recent study was released by the Alabama Wildlife and Freshwater Fisheries Division that is causing a little bit of stir, and this study only affects tournament fishing. The study asks or wants to have a slot limit from 14 to 20 inches on the Coosa Rivers. Now, the Coosa Rivers are 6 impoundments reservoir that start down in the bottom of Georgia, but 90% of the water is up in Alabama. They include Weiss, Neely Henry, Logan Martin, Lay, Mitchell, and Jordan. The study says that because of tournament bass fishing on Neely Henry over 3 years, that they had a mortality rate for bass that equaled 45%. 45% of the bass died. Now, this wasn't during the summer. During the summer, they said that 50 or 80% of the fish died that were caught during fishing tournaments. And that brought up a lot of questions for me. First off, could that be really true? And I know in the past, Bass and other organizations have always kind of, I don't want to say fudged the numbers, but there was a higher mortality rate than we knew, especially during the summer. If they're pulling fish up from deep to the warmer water, spending all that time in the live well, and then weighing them, they can die. That's the truth. And we had one tournament this year on elites that just was a madhouse of dead fish. But at 50 to 80%, that's a lot of fish dying. And I really don't know if I trust those numbers. So I had to talk to somebody that I didn't know that could give me the insight on what was going on. And I had specific questions not only about mortality rates, but the economic impact that a study like this that could pass in January, that doesn't need legislation to pass it, that could be signed off on, that will have a serious effect on tournament fishing on those 6 bodies of water. And in my opinion, there's only one person to talk to. Even though there's 4 tournaments out there, the ABT is by far the biggest. So I reached out to Kay Donaldson. She is the program director, and she is extremely passionate, not only about the Alabama Bass Trail, but about fishing in general. She is very conservation oriented, and she is worried about where this goes. This affects her livelihood and the tournament's livelihood. Now, that ABT tournament is 10 tournaments a year in 2 divisions and 1 tournament trail. They get 225 anglers in that one. They have a second one called the ABT 100 where they have 3 tournaments and they have 100 anglers in those. Now, these tournaments go on every year and they sell out year after year in 10 minutes. Think about that. 10 minutes sold out. So the ABT is one of, if not the biggest trail in Alabama. Now the ABT goes to 13 bodies of water during the year. And Kay was very adamant that this will have an effect on her tournament trail. First off, there'll be less people that come out of state that come in to fish these. But she definitely thinks they'll still have no problem selling out this year or for 2025. And she mentioned years ago on the BFL, it took 15 pounds to win that BFL tournament. This year on Neely Henry, the ABT took 18 to 20 pounds. So the fish aren't getting, the fishing still is as good as it was, if not better, than several years ago when the BFL was there. Overall, they've had banner tournament catches over the last few years. Winning weights have not declined at all. And while there are some tough tournaments, there are other great tournaments. Depending on when the tournament is how good the fishing is. That's just normal anywhere throughout the country. But she said the number of fish and the weight that we catch has not decreased at all. And the other thing that the ABT does that probably doesn't get much recognition is that they report everything to the state of Alabama, to the ADNR. She also mentioned that each one of these areas has probably a 30% reduction in bass year after year that are either eaten or killed or just die of old age. But why is the mortality rate so high? Now, there's a lot of times I was told that maybe they stop pulling water, which stops the current, and they might stop pulling for 1 or 2 weeks. And in that 1 or 2 weeks, the water temperature drastically climbs, and there's not as much oxygen in the water, and it's warm out. And because there's no current influxing new fresh water that those fish that get caught have an issue and can die. But on the APT side, they're doing everything they can to make sure that those fish are properly released and released live. Kay told me that they are doing everything to be conservation oriented. She said they just spent over $100,000 to purchase the best equipment on the market to be able to revive fish, keep them live, and put them back into the lakes that they're fishing so that they don't die. And it brought up a lot of questions. The first question was, why not do the MLF style of fishing? And when she gave me this answer, my head pretty much turned. And she said, I don't want to throw shade at all at the MLF, but they have 40 anglers. We have 225 anglers. To make it so that we do catch, weigh, and release like the MLF, we would have an astronomical amount of costs. Not to mention, here we are talking about the catch, weigh, and release. If MLF was so determined to make this where they are, why aren't the invitationals and the BFLs and the other tournaments using that same format? And the reason is the cost. It costs way too much money to do that, to get the Starlink, to get the internet, to do all that stuff to make it so it works. Not to mention you have a marshal on the boat. And when anglers are inputting their own stuff, there's a possibility that not only will they cheat, but they could be wrong. So the MLF style doesn't fit her needs. Kay made it very clear that she is a steward of the resource, that she doesn't think her mortality rates for her tournaments are nearly as high as what was said in the study. Some 30% in the winter colder months and then 50 to 80%. She doesn't believe that's remotely close to her mortality rates. And she isn't just putting on little tournaments. She is key and central and probably the biggest tournament trail in Alabama. And I asked her, what happens if this goes through? And she said they'll work around it and make it work. But she does think that there'll be anglers from out of state that don't come in and fish it. Because if they have a slot limit that's 14 to 20, why would you come to a tournament in Alabama and catch 1 to 2 pounders when you can catch the same tournament or same fish in your own state that are that size too? So anglers that come in will have a financial impact on the community that's up there. And Kay is very worried about the communities. These communities strive and want to have these tournaments come to them because they bring in people to stay at lodgings and Airbnbs and food and gas. And those 225 anglers that show up for that tournament at that place are boosting that community's economy. And there's sometimes where the marketing budget that they have for that community might be $30,000, but they have to pay a person and then the rest of it goes toward marketing. And that is nothing. So Kay's tournament trail helps boost the economy every place they go. And by every place, I mean in upwards to $300,000 to $500,000 for that few days that they're there. And then not to mention if they go to the championships, it's almost $750,000 for that community. And Kay told me that over a 10-year span, their survey showed that they gave $92.2 million to the community. And when you look at the community impact that this could have, and now 3 years of tournaments not happening on these 6 lakes and impoundments, you can't take for granted what that impact has. That's 3 years of income that won't come to that hosting city. And those are very small communities that need that extra money. She believes that 2 to 5 of her tournaments could be affected if this passes. And the issue of it passing is that it doesn't need legislation to pass. It can be signed off in emergency declaration and done immediately. But should it be? Shouldn't that study give some credit to what we've done or what they've done in the past to now? Can they not have some sort of mutual agreement where it isn't 14 to 20 or whatever? Could there be a middle ground that would help all of them? And is there a better way to not pass it and then help build the resource? Because they could put better habitats, they could put different bait fish, they could do all sorts of things to keep that income coming in for those cities without passing this. And this is a drastic thing for those tournaments. We might not think it's that big of a deal because it's only 6. But when you start doing one, it tends to be a group of other things. Who's saying it doesn't go to Gunnersville or Eufaula or someplace else? Because they see the growth rate, or they see the long vision of the conservation. But at the same time, they're not taking in the impact that it has on those cities. And I'm very conservation oriented. But I also think there's some sort of middle ground that needs to be there. But they're not willing to listen to a middle ground. It's cut and dry. But when I look at it financially and look at what these little cities are having issues with and taking away that extra income, it just doesn't make sense to me. And who's saying after 3 years that they don't go, we need another 3 years? Or who's saying that, why not try this at another place? And to only have it with tournament fishing, and the advisory board is going to meet in January and decide yes or no. And I understand that they can sign it at any time and put it into effect. And while I respect what they did to do the study and the research behind it, is it the right thing to do? Because when we start doing one, the landslide of other things can happen. So what do you think? Are they making a bad decision? Comment below and tell me what you think. Thanks for hitting that like and subscribe button. Thanks for all the new comments and subscribers and everything. I really do appreciate it. So take a kid fishing, tight lines, cheers, and get your fish on.